We have made it to the series finale here in the San Francisco Giants franchise, here on MLB The Show 24. Before we get started, I have one quick order of business to mention. Unfortunately, the save file for the series actually corrupted. Now, luckily, I keep multiple save files for all of my series, but the World Series against the Royals, unfortunately, did not save, so I had to re-simulate it. We still ended up winning the World Series, but the stats and whatnot are a little bit different. So anyway, what we're going to get through in today's episode is we are going to simulate into the future until all of the guys on our roster have retired. And if that means we have to simulate 25 years into the future, that's what we're going to do. Spoiler alert, we did simulate that far. So it's going to be really fascinating to follow along with these players and how the rest of their major league careers go. There are a few guys in particular who I've certainly got my eye on. How good will Tommy Rogers become? We've now seen him through 4 big league seasons, and at just 22 years old going into next year, you figure the sky is the limit for someone like him who has been an outstanding player over the last 2 years, all-star in both 2028 and 2029, 4-WAR season in both of those years as well. Will he age gracefully into his 30s, or will MLB The Show regression ultimately kill him? What about Jun-Hoo Lee, who we have had since episode 1? He has been here for 6 years now. He's going to be 31 next year. He hasn't shown any signs of regression yet, averaging a WAR of 7 over the first 6 seasons of this series. We, of course, extended him and Tommy Rogers last offseason, but the rest of this roster could look rather different pretty quickly, given that we have an older roster core and not a ton of super long-term deals other than Lee and Rogers. What about a guy like Kyler Rodriguez, who's never gotten the full chance to be a starter, whether it's other guys playing better above him or injuries? But Kyler's been a great postseason performer, World Series MVP in 2028, hit the walk-off to win the World Series in the last episode against the Royals. And then everybody else in between as well. We will know what happened in all of our guys' careers. We will recap them during their retirements and follow along with our team over the next handful of decades. We're going to keep everything on auto except for trades. I did this last year with the Marlins franchise long-term sim, and I found it to be way quicker and easier than my previous long-term sims. Now, there are a couple of guys like Rogers and Lee who I'm going to make sure stick around on this team forever, but otherwise, it's pretty much fair game with what the CPU chooses to do with the roster. So we'll see how many more titles we can win. We've won 2 in this series. That's now 10 overall for the organization. We've made the playoffs 4 years in a row. Hopefully we can add to that. And we'll see how many of these check marks we can fill by the end of the episode. We certainly will not have a shortage of time in terms of filling all of these out. So we'll start with retirements. There's nobody notable in this retirement class, but that's not going to be the case for just about every other season of today's episode. Going into free agency again, we can't choose how we manage these contracts. It's all up to the CPU, and we've got a handful of guys who we are going to have to make decisions on going into the offseason. Of course, we traded for Spencer Strider at the deadline knowing that he was expiring. Both of our catchers, Blake Sable and Patrick Bailey, who have been on the roster since the start. Leody Taveras, Oswald Peraza, Brendan Donovan, Ian Hamilton, and Yel de los Santos, J.P. Crawford, Ian Happ. A lot of guys on this list, and it'll be interesting to see how the CPU chooses to go about this free agency class. Being that we really only have a couple of super big contracts right now, I think we can afford to be a little aggressive if we choose to. There's Kyle Harrison, our former guy, who, of course, we traded for Spencer Strider. It looks like the game wants to try to run it back with most of these guys, but we would lose Strider, who signs with Atlanta. So we got Strider from the Braves at the deadline, and then he immediately leaves us for the Braves. I guess this was Atlanta's master plan all along. How are we going to get revenge? We signed Kyle Harrison. What are the odds of this? I promise none of this was my doing. This was all the game. But after swapping Spencer Strider and Kyle Harrison at the deadline, we will re-swap them in free agency. So welcome back to the Giants, Kyle Harrison. We signed him to a long contract. He will be here for the next, I think, 8 or 9 years. There's a reason why I traded him for Strider. I really thought Strider was going to age better than him. So I hope I'm wrong now that Kyle Harrison is back on our roster. We're not going to use a Rule 5 pick this year. Obviously, last year we landed Chase Dollander, who was terrific, minus the playoffs where he was kind of a choker. But would you look at this? We add Hunter Green to the rotation. That's pretty exciting. I feel like we didn't really need to add a starter, but that's fun. I'm intrigued. We do lose Leody Taveras, who signs with the Chicago White Sox, one of our 4 finalists for the MLB The Show 25 series, which if you have not voted, I recommend you do so in the community tab. Oswald Peraza, meanwhile, ends up with the Angels, but we brought everybody else back. Blake Sable is a big one. Brendan Donovan is back. Ian Hamilton and Daniel De Los Santos in the bullpen. Ian Happ is back as well. But we do lose Patrick Bailey. He signs with the Pirates and will be platooning with Endy Rodriguez. And then J.P. Crawford does not sign anywhere. He's the second best free agent behind another former Giant in Jose Ramirez. So we're pretty crowded in terms of the pitching, and we can't forget that Fernando Molina is a starter as well. I was going to up his stamina last year, I forgot, so I'm doing it this year. I changed his position to starting pitcher where he's a 91. And with all the depth we have here, we have like 7 guys we can theoretically start. Scott Rios, unfortunately, who I was expecting to be a starter for us this year, will not for right now because of the addition of Hunter Green. Otherwise, the team looks pretty much the same. Edwin Arroyo will be our everyday shortstop, as I had kind of anticipated going into this year. We are actually going to start Scott Rios and then move Chase Dollander to the bullpen. I switched his position and his rating went way down, but his individual ratings are all the same. I wanted to make sure Scott Rios was in the rotation because I think he's ready. He's an 82 overall. He's been okay over the first couple of seasons in, I think, 28 total starts. So around a full season worth of sample for him at this point. But pretty much the same team for the most part. The game wanted to run it back, and that might be a mistake. 46-51. We're in 4th in the NL West. The Dodgers are not doing too much better. The Braves as well, they're having a solid season, but are in 4th in the East. So it feels like a change of the guard in the National League. In terms of All-Stars, Sandy Alcantara is back. Spencer Strider's there, which makes me disappointed. But Kyle Harrison's numbers might actually be better. So I guess this kind of worked out for all parties. Camilo Doval is an all-star once again, the 7th appearance of his career. He's made it every season of this series other than 2025. Jojo Romero, though, has had another really bad year, which is not great. We had 2 position players, Tommy Rogers and Stone Garrett. Very happy for Stone. Finally gets his first all-star nod. He's been deserving for a little while, but he's had his most consistent season yet. And then Tommy Rogers is back. 600 slugging percentage. The average and the on-base percentage are a little bit low, but he's hitting for great extra base power and is having a pretty good season all around. So we're going to simulate now to the end of the year, and at 81-81, we won the division. I was not expecting that, I'll tell you what. So the NL West was a disaster. Really, the entire NL as a whole was not that great. The 3 best teams were all in the NL East, not including Atlanta. So I guess the AL has snatched our chain, and they are now better than the National League. As we take a look at some stats here to end this season, what I noticed initially is that it seems like Jung-Hoo Lee is starting to regress. That is certainly not what we want to see. He's still had a very strong season with a WAR of 6, so it hasn't shown in his play yet, but I have to think it will be in the future. Tommy only finished hitting .262, not a great end to his year. Only .227 for Munetaka Murakami, who is regressing like a truck. -9 contact against lefties, -8 power against righties, -16 power against lefties. And that's not to mention he was one of the worst defensive players in baseball, finishing with a -1 WAR. We've got 1 more year left on his current deal, and then he will be expiring. I'm not really sure he's going to get a second major league contract, though. His regression, which kind of started last year, has been notable. Kyler Rodriguez on the 60-day injured list. He regressed a lot at just 23 years old. He didn't have a bad season, but he got hurt again. And as we know, injuries are the concern with him. Fernando Molina also on the IL. Had a disappointing season himself, back-to-back. Pretty poor years from him. But Kyle Harrison was great. Sandy Alcantara was phenomenal. Scott Rios was solid. ERA right at 4. And then the bullpen really was not all that great for their standards, other than Camilo Doval. So we'll see if we can make it a three-peat. Being that our team went 500, I kind of doubt it. But once you make the MLB playoffs, you never know. We'll start with the Cubs, who we are 9-1 in the playoffs all-time against. Well, we can make it 11-1. We continue to own them, as we've got the Pirates in the NLDS. We are down 2-1. We're in danger, but we win Game 4. Harrison against Paul Skeens in Game 5, and the Pirates win it, scoring 2 runs in the 8th. I guess we kept Harrison in a little bit too long. Hamilton allows the winning run. So unfortunately, there will be no three-peat. We do not win the World Series, and it is the Pittsburgh Pirates. That bottom of the 8th inning ended up being the difference for them. They beat the Angels in 7 after beating the Mets in 7. Not a stress-free postseason for the Pirates, who had elimination games in all 3 series that they played in. Now on to the list of retirements here in 2030. Tyler Rogers is the most notable name here. Of course, we had him and his twin brother Taylor in the bullpen for the first couple seasons of the series. Taylor was the better of the twins, but Tyler was the only one whose retirement I noticed. Jose Altuve, Garrett Cole, and Freddie Freeman all make the Hall of Fame. We do not have a very long list of free agents. Edwin Diaz and Yel de los Santos, Lucas Gilbreth, Ian Happ, all pretty solid, but they're all quite old. However, that does not include Sandy Alcantara, who had a player option that he declined. He ends up signing with the Toronto Blue Jays on a 1-year deal. I think this opens things up for the rest of the rotation, though, so I think we'll be able to survive without him, but he is still quite good, so it is still a big loss. Felix Bautista, after 2 seasons in Milwaukee, gets traded to the Reds. It's crazy that Bautista and Romero both had that crazy playoff run for us. Then they signed big contracts in free agency, and they've been really bad since then, and now they've both been traded. Here's what the lineup looks like in 2031. Again, usual suspects for the most part. Stephen Yu, one of our draft picks, is now in the mold. Chase Dollander returns to the rotation. Rodney Bravo in the bullpen. He's a really good pitching prospect who I think is going to be a high-level starter for us at some point in the near future. We're doing a lot better here at the All-Star break, 59-38. This is certainly more like it. Although Sandy Alcantara is the starter in the All-Star game for Toronto, he has been very good this year. Camilo Doval gets in again. That's now 8 times for his career. Will he hit double digits? I don't know. He's got to keep up this level of play, but it's possible. Blake Sabol finally gets an All-Star nod. Very well deserved. It's crazy that he's never got one. Tommy Rogers and Jun-Hoo Lee do not, though. Jun-Hoo Lee's play is now really starting to go down, while Tommy's just not having a very good season. His offensive ratings are going down. Hopefully that's not a sign of things to come. I was not planning on Tommy Rogers starting to regress at 23. We do have a great year, though, 96-66, number 1 seed in the National League as we take a look at our stats to wrap up the season. Simone Vincent hit over 300. Tommy Rogers only hit 247. Really not a great year for him. But Blake Sabol was ridiculous. 289, 26 home runs, 110 RBIs. Otherwise, no one really stood out offensively. I feel like our hitting numbers were better last year, even though, obviously, we had a better season this year. Munetaka Murakami, not on the postseason roster. He was fine. I mean, he was better than he was last year. The bar is kind of low for that, but unfortunately for him, I think he's played his last game as a San Francisco Giant. I'd be surprised if we brought him back. As for the rotation, another great year for Kyle Harrison. Dollander's up to a 93. He played well. Scott Rios had a great year and saw a major boost in progression. He's a 90. I think this could be a sign of things to come for young Scott Rios, who is only 24 years old. Jojo Romero had a great year. That's promising after a couple bad regular seasons in a row. We've got the Marlins here in the first round. I don't think we've ever played against them in the postseason. They, of course, had that big spending spree a couple off seasons ago with Acuna, Tristan Casas, Ellie De La Cruz, who's not on their team anymore. He's with the Tigers. We're struggling, though, and we lose in 4. Losing this last game 11-1. It looks like we rolled over and quit. Not a good start from Scott Rios. We got farther along in the playoffs last year at 81-81 than we did this season. We lost the NLDS in 5 a year ago, and sure enough, the Marlins win the whole thing. They beat Toronto in the World Series. The Blue Jays, another one of our final 4 for the MLB The Show 25 series. Now on to retirements. Thairo Estrada calls it a career. We had him for the first 2 seasons of the series. Traded him away to Toronto for Yariel Rodriguez, a move that ended up being a very good one for us. But he was really good those first couple of years with the Blue Jays. Won a Gold Glove, made a couple of All-Star teams, despite being a limited offensive player. but it ended up being a good move for us. Rodriguez was a great lawn reliever, and if we do pick the Blue Jays for MLB The Show 25, I'd be excited to get to use Rodriguez again. Cedric Mullins is here as well. We got him in 2025, traded him away in 2026, I believe, to the Astros for Zach DeZenzo. We brought him back into the farm system, though, so he was in the organization when we won our championships. Joel Payamps was on the team in 2028 when we first won a World Series. He retires a few seasons later. Blake Snell will retire. If you remember, he signed with the Giants just days after this series started, but before we got to the season opener, so I was able to add him to the roster. He was not great in 2024, was very good in 2025, but I decided to let him go, and that proved to be a great decision. He had some bad seasons. I don't know how his 7 ERA season gave him a full point of WAR, but we basically swapped him in free agency for Aaron Savale, and that ended up being a great move for us. Framber Valdez is here. He was not with our team, but we beat him in both World Series, and I felt like that was kind of relevant. Now here in the offseason, Chase Dollander, Stone Garrett, Brendan Donovan, Ian Happ, Munetaka Murakami, Yariel Rodriguez, and Daniel De Los Santos headline the list of free agents. I think we've got to bring back Stone Garrett for sure. I would still like to see Brendan Donovan come back, even though he's a little bit older. Dollander's a tricky one because we have a lot of pitchers in the system, but he is coming off a really good season, so maybe for the right price. But I think given that we just paid Kyle Harrison big money, Hunter Green still has 3 more years, I don't know how aggressive we can be. And sure enough, Dollander, 9 years, 162 from the Padres. I would not have been willing to give him all that, put it that way. So he will now play for his 3rd NL West team. I do want to add an impact bat, though. I felt like someone like Scott Burkett could have been perfect. We got to see him in the World Series with the Royals. Apparently, the Giants offered Burkett and Casey Mize. They both go elsewhere. But we do bring in Sandy Alcantara. So after 1 year with the Blue Jays, he's back with us. We also bring in George Valera. There's the impact bat we were looking for. Feels like a really team-friendly deal for Valera. For those of you who watched the Guardian series in MLB The Show 22, you know how much of a dog he was in that series. But he's had a WAR of at least 4 in each of the last 3 seasons. We were able to bring back Stone Garrett, which is a big one. We do lose Brendan Donovan. He now joins a crowded Oakland A's middle infield that includes Mookie Betts at 39 years old. Munetaka Murakami looks to revive his career in Seattle. He is 32, but with his regression, I kind of doubt it. The game also added Mark Vientos. I don't really know why. He's a couple years removed from hitting 194. It does seem like the game is kind of obsessed with bringing former players back. They've now done it twice today, first with Kyle Harrison and then with Sandy Alcantara. And as you'll see throughout the video, that's going to be a common occurrence. Here's number 3. Zach DeZenzo is back. We got him from the Astros in the Cedric Mullins trade. We then traded him to Cleveland, I assume in the Jose Ramirez deal. He finds his way back on the roster a few seasons later. As for the pitching, Rodney Bravo now joins the rotation. I'm very excited about him. Sandy Alcantara will be a long reliever for us. We just happen to have 5 guys who are better than him right now. So at the All-Star break, 55-42, 3rd place in the division, but only 2 back of the top spot. As we take a look at the All-Stars, Chase Dollander is the starter in the game for the National League. Not great. What is kind of cool, though, is the NL West has all 5 starting pitchers, including Scott Rios, who has taken another step up from last year. First All-Star appearance, hopefully of many. Jojo Romero also gets his first All-Star nod, but no hitters. No Tommy Rogers, who has been pretty good this year, OPS above 900. It looks like he's missed a lot of time with injury. John Hewley's also been pretty good, so that's encouraging as we go 93-69. Nice. Good enough for the number 1 seed. I noticed early in the 2030s, there was like way too much parity across the MLB. There's no 100-win teams. There's no 100-loss teams. Everybody's winning pretty much between 67 and, say, 95 games, it feels like. As we take a look at some stats, Elijah Warren has really broken out. He had 18 homers, OPS above 800. That's pretty cool at the age of 29. Tommy Rogers was not great during the second half of the year, but Stone Garrett played really well. Only 227 for Kyler Rodriguez. It seems like he hasn't really been able to figure it out, unfortunately. Fernando Molina, another season-ending injury. I don't think he's injury-prone, though. I think it's just bad luck, a head fracture. What are we supposed to do with that? Molina's now had 4 bad seasons in a row, though. 2 of them have been cut short due to injury. I was really optimistic for him, and, well, he's gone downhill. Kyle Harrison has not gone downhill, though. He has been a superb signing for us. He has far outplayed Spencer Strider over the last 3 years. I think it's fair to say I read that situation wrong, but the game did not. Sandy Alcantara did not have a great year. It seems like he's kind of tanked himself while Camilo Doval is going down, but we do add Warner Green to the rotation, another one of our better pitching prospects. We've got the Dodgers here in the NLDS. We've only played them once in the postseason before. Into a Game 5, Scott Rios versus Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and we get the win. Our first playoff series win of the episode, and based on the box score, I was able to figure out it came off of a 2-run walk-off home run in the bottom of the 9th by Tommy Rogers, and that's after allowing 2 in the top half of the 9th. Now the Brewers in the NLCS, we lead 3-2. Can we win Game 6 to push ourselves in the World Series? Yes, we do, and it's against the White Sox, who finally have gotten over the hump. The White Sox had a fun young core in this series. They weren't really able to do anything with it, but they've got some good players here, including the former Giant Leody Taveras, whose numbers are pretty much the same from where they've always been. Mid-700 OPS guy who always steps his game up in the postseason. We're up in the series 2-1. We win Game 4, and there you go. World Series number 3 for the Giants. We win it in 5, 3-2. Mark Vientos and Blake Sabo go deep. Great start for Scott Rios, who actually gets to be a part of the World Series team after the last time he tore his shoulder in the playoffs. Brendan Donovan, World Series MVP, and then George Valera wins the postseason MVP. Now into retirements. Still no one notable from our roster, but we do have Walker Buehler, who was on the team during season number 6. Had him start the year as a starter, then he was replaced by Chase Dolander, who obviously sort of ascended out of nowhere for us. Shout out Walker Buehler, though. Very solid career, mostly with the Dodgers and the Royals. Matt Chapman's an interesting one. He was one of our better players in season 1, and we decided to maximize his value by trading him to the Cincinnati Reds. And in hindsight, I feel like the Reds ended up getting the better end of this deal. In return, we got Jake Fraley, who was a dud for us. Jonathan India, who had a few solid seasons for us, but left after 2026, I believe. And then Edwin Arroyo, who's finally starting to come on. I guess the jury would still be out on him. But Chapman ended up better than both India and Jake Fraley. So it kind of worked out for the Reds. J.P. Crawford is here as well, another one of our very early roster moves. We got him quick into season 1 after he struggled to start the year with the Mariners, and this was a great move for us. He was great the first 3 seasons of the series. In year 3, 26 homers, 5.5 WAR. Then he started to get older, but he was able to adapt his game. He became maybe the best walker in baseball. He had a 16% walk rate his final year to just a 13% strikeout mark. After 2029, the last season of the actual series, he has not played since. So he retired a back-to-back World Series champion, essentially. Edwin Diaz is here as well. We had him in 2029. He had a good year, did not have a good playoff run, though. Then 2030, he struggled, but he did have a solid year in 2031. The numbers are not great, but he did make the All-Star team with Detroit, and then that was it for him. He's done here in 2032. Jorge Soler Power! Retires. We had him the first 3 seasons of the series. He became the first Giant since Barry Bonds to hit for over 30 home runs in a season. The home run numbers were always large with him. He hit 100 in the 3 seasons we had, but he was never a great player. Finished with a negative WAR, had a couple solid seasons after, made an All-Star team in 2025, home run champion and home run derby winner that year. Lamont Wade is in here as well. We traded him in the season 2 offseason for Aniel De Los Santos. Looked like a small deal at the time, but De Los Santos ended up being a highly impactful bullpen arm for us. No Hall of Famers. Now looking at the list of free agents, Fernando Molina, Blake Sabol, Stone Garrett. Keep in mind, Sabol's 35, I think. Garrett's 37. Kyler Rodriguez is an interesting one. Him and Johnny Hackman are going to be kind of fascinating. Neither of those guys have fully developed into what they could have been, but they're both young, 26 and 27 years old, respectively. I'm curious to see if they come back, though. In the case of Hackman, he's been pretty much the same player since his rookie year. You kind of know what you're going to get with him. And then Kyler Rodriguez, it's been a little bit more up and down, mostly because of the injuries. Still has not played 100 games in a season. He almost did this year. He played 99. Wasn't all that good, though, this year with the OPS barely above 700. And then Molina's a fascinating case as well because he's been bad a few years in a row. The best players here are Blake Sabol and Stone Garrett, but at 35 and 37, with Garrett starting to regress, they're getting older. That's part of baseball. So it'll be interesting to see how we navigate through this free agency period as Carson Whisenhunt, who was with our team earlier in this series, he's turned into a nice player. He signs a 2-year, $35 million contract with the Boston Red Sox. Patrick Bailey, after a few years in Pittsburgh, ends up with the Guardians. Adael Amador to the Giants. Solid addition at shortstop, only 29 years old. He's got some good years left. Kyler goes to the Cubs, so he does leave San Francisco. Never developed into a great player here, but was a postseason riser. Stone Garrett leaves for the Tampa Bay Rays. We're going to miss him. He's been one of our best players since we got him all the way back in year number 3. We do retain Fernando Molina for a lot of money. We surely will not regret that contract. Blake Sabol is also back on a short-term deal. Johnny Hackman returns as well, while Edgar Caro is signed as well. I don't really know why. I guess as a backup. Sandy Alcantara, meanwhile, goes to Cleveland. I wanted to take a look at Tristan McKenzie because if you remember, we had him in 2027 where he wasn't that good. We traded him back to Cleveland, and he's been really good since then. And he's still a 90. So it seems like we kind of whiffed on the Tristan McKenzie situation. Anyway, that brings us into 2033, 10th season of the series overall, 4th of the long-term sim. The lineup is starting to look quite a bit different, and all of a sudden, most of these guys were not here during the World Series run. The pitching rotation as well has changed a lot over the last couple of years, and it feels like the core of our 2028 and 2029 championship teams are starting to fade away. 54 and 45, second in the division behind the Rockies of all teams. As for the All-Star, Kyle Harrison finally gets a spot again. And look at Fernando Molina having a great year. First-time All-Star, maybe the contract wasn't a bad move. No position players, though. Another mediocre year for Tommy Rogers. Has he peaked? Is he going to continue to go down? This is now 3 years in a row where he hasn't been great. Jun-Hoo Lee, meanwhile, is barely even a starter anymore. He is certainly a shell of himself, and we really could be looking at the end of the road for Jun-Hoo Lee at this point. At least Tommy Rogers is still a starter at the very least. So we're going to simulate to the end of the year as we go 84 and 78. Again, not a great season, but it does squeak us into the playoffs somehow as the number 6 seed in the National League. In terms of our final stats for the year, the lineup looks basically entirely irrecognizable. Now, part of that is because Rogers and Lee both are not here. Tommy Rogers is injured. He fractured his forearm. He played adequately, I guess, to end the year, but still really not playing all that well 3 years in a row. Jun-Hoo Lee, meanwhile, is on the minor league team. Scott Rios, though, had a great year. He'll be a free agent after next year, and he will be making a fat bag, hopefully from us, because we cannot afford to let him go. He is a monster. We've got the Pirates again. They beat us in the past. We're looking for revenge, and we get it. We sweep them. Now against the Dodgers here in the NLCS, and we win. 84 wins to the NLCS. Now the Washington Nationals tied at 2. We win Game 5, and we're going to the World Series, a rematch with the Rangers, who we beat in our first title back in 2028. Now we are looking for number 4. The Rangers won 95 games, so by record, they were a lot better than us, and they have some familiar faces. They have Evan Carter still, Alejandro Ordonez, Geraldo Perdomo, former Giant Michael Kopech is here. So we're struggling early. We lose the first 2 on the road. End Game 3, end Game 4, 16-3 is how we lose. Yikes. Jordan Diaz homered 3 times in this game. Tommy Rogers did what he could, triple shy of the cycle, but everybody else was horrible. Jordan Diaz hit 625, 4 homers, 11 RBIs in the 4 games. Good God, I don't even think we scored 11 runs in the 4 games. So that brings us to retirements here in 2033 after losing the first World Series title of this series. Aaron Savale is here. We mentioned the inter free agency swap with him and Blake Snell between us and the Diamondbacks. Now, technically, Snell was on the Diamondbacks longer than we had Savale, only 2 seasons here, but it ended up being a big win for us. Savale played really well in 2026. Not as good in 27, which is why we let him go, although he was very good in 2028 for the Rays. Blake Snell, meanwhile, that season had an ERA in the 7s, so who's the real loser? Jordan Hicks has done a fascinating career. Very solid reliever in St. Louis. He signs with us as a starter, and he sucked. We traded him to the Blue Jays for nothing. He sucked. Then with the Mets, he sucked. Then with the Cardinals, he sucked. He was finally used as a reliever with the Angels, and he was good. Why didn't we just keep him as a reliever to begin with? I think the best way to describe Jordan Hicks' Giants career was this incredible tweet I saw on Twitter maybe a year ago. The Cardinals were celebrating Jackie Robinson, and someone pointed out that Jackie would probably piss himself if he had to watch a 100-mile-an-hour sinker from Jordan Hicks. And then Jackie would watch 3 more pitches and walk to first base. Feels about how Jordan Hicks' tenure went here. Mike Trout, Nolan Arenado, and Paul Goldschmidt make the Hall of Fame here in this Hall of Fame cycle, as that sends us to another year of free agency. We're going to decline Jung-Hoo Lee's team option because, well, he kind of stinks now. But we're not going to let him retire anywhere other than the Giants. In terms of money, many of these contracts are moving forward. Tommy's in year 6 of 12. Kyle Harrison's in year 5 of 9. Aaron Eldridge is now in our division. He is a demon. Ends up with the Padres. We do sign Bubba Chandler. Very good relief pitcher with Camilo Doval getting older and Jojo Romero potentially gone. I think that could be a good move. Ryan Clifford signs with us as well. Blake Sabol is back once again, as is Camilo Doval. Jojo Romero, meanwhile, will be going to the Pittsburgh Pirates. He's only a 77 overall. The contract certainly did not age well at first for Minnesota, but then we traded for him, and then he had a few good seasons after that. So I guess it kind of did work out in the end. This is what the lineup looks like going into the 5th year of the long-term sim. Again, pretty irrecognizable at this point. Still have a few names left, but much of the core, much of the older pieces are all gone. Not many real-life players remaining on this roster. Here in 2034, we are tied with the Rockies at the All-Star break. Scott Rios will be starting in the All-Star game. Remember, he's a free agent at the end of the year, and he's having his best season yet. Sub-2 ERA. How much money will he make? The answer is that it'll be a lot. Put it that way. As for the rest of the All-Star team, we do have an interesting one in the outfield. Tommy Rogers is back! After 3 down seasons, he's having a great year. 27 home runs, hitting .311, slugging at .670, OPS at .1069, WAR at 4.1, amongst one of the highest marks of his career already. He's in second for the MVP, while Rios is in first for the Cy Young. Love to see that. Hopefully Tommy, in particular, can continue this. So, I've made it to the trade deadline here. As I mentioned earlier, we cannot let Scott Rios go anywhere else. He's another guy who I think we have to keep around. 7 years, $250 is our offer. He says yes. And so Scott Rios will be sticking around for the very foreseeable future. He'll be making a lot of money. 94-68. We do win the division. We grab the number 1 seed, squeaking over the Padres, who passed Colorado, who had a rough second half of the year. Great season for Tommy Rogers. 38 homers, 114 RBIs, .309 average, OPS above 1,000. Easily the best season of his career. He won the Hank Aaron Award, won a Silver Slugger. No MVP. He finished in second behind Aaron Eldridge, while Scott Rios finished in second behind Alejandro Reyes, who went 22-8. He had a decision in 30 of his 33 starts. What year is this? 1970? I mean, good on him for going that long. Ryan Clifford, 40 home runs, OPS above 900. Hello! What a great first season with the Giants for him. Looks like that signing's going to age well. We got him on the cheap as well. Of course, Scott Rios had a great year. Molina played well again. Harrison is starting to slip a tiny bit, but he's still a 91 overall. He is still quite good. Camilo Doval, meanwhile, now in the minors. He's still good, 3.26 ERA this past year. Jung-Hoo Lee, meanwhile, did not play at all. He is quite bad at this point. I think bad would be an understatement. We've got the Padres here in the NLCS. We split the first 2 games, win game 3, win game 4. So we've got the Cardinals next up in the NLCS, and we're on a hot streak. Look at us. We finally have our win streak snapped, but we're going back to the World Series for a third straight year against the Toronto Blue Jays, who have been one of the better teams in this series through the 2030s. They got the number one seed with 89 wins. That's how much parity there is. There's too much. So the Blue Jays still have Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who's 35 years old. He's become one of the best hitters of this generation and probably a surefire Hall of Famer. Over 2,500 hits, 524 homers. He's probably a Hall of Famer right now, and he's got some years left. Still is an 85 overall. Interesting to see him still on the Blue Jays, because if we pick them for MLB 25, the big opening storyline would be whether or not he sticks around. Tied at 2, very competitive series so far as we win Game 5. We will lose Game 6. Scott Rios on the mound. Game 7 of the World Series, and the Giants win it all. Our 4th title of the series. We did not start the game off strong, but a 2-run homer in the 6th by Blake Sabol tied it, and a 3-run homer in the bottom of the 8th by Brennan Davis is enough to win it. Now taking a look at retirements. Here's a big one. Camilo Doval calls it a career at just 37 years old. I say only 37 because for this game, that's kind of on the younger side, but I guess he's a family man. He calls it a career here in 2034. He never really lost that much of a step in terms of his production. Sure, maybe he was not the elite closer that he was early in this series as an 8-time All-Star, but he was still a productive reliever towards the end of his career. Through the most amount of innings of his career this last year, over 85, finished with a negative WAR, even though, again, he was pretty productive, but he figures, I might as well leave the game before the game leaves me. The Over Peguero retires. He had me fooled in season number 3 that he had a chance to be a long-term starter for us. And, well, I quickly learned after that that would not end up happening. Felix Bautista, the Mountain, has retired. For such a big piece of this series within the story that he played, he was only here for half a season. Feels like he was here way longer than that. He ended up with Milwaukee, wasn't that great. Pitched okay with Cincinnati afterwards. Sandy Alcantara is done, and he left the Marlins series last year with a very complicated legacy. He was a good player in the 5 seasons that we had him, but he was a playoff choker. Never good in the postseason, and then Game 7 of the World Series, the last game he pitched in, he comes out of the bullpen and blows it. So we brought him back, essentially, in 2027. He was really good for 3.5 years. We had him again in 2022 before he spent a year in Cleveland. 6-time All-Star. I guess he would be, only a 2-time World Series champ, but a very good one at that. Wilmer Flores, we had him in year number 1, and after we traded him away, he remained a really good hitter. I didn't think he'd be this good this long. It was still a good trade for us. We got Owen Casey back from the Cubs, and then we later used Casey to get a guy named Stone Garrett. So I think it's fair to say that trade ended up being a win. Jake Fraley, we got him in the Matt Chapman, Jonathan India deal. He ended up being good after we let him go. Won a Gold Glove in 2029. AJ Minter, we had him in seasons 2 and 3 of this series. Had some good seasons afterward with the Texas Rangers. Penn Murphy and Zach McKinstry both give me very bad flashbacks to playing against the Braves in the NLCS. Those guys were demons for being like mid-70s overall. Shohei Ohtani retires, and spoiler alert, he does not make the Hall of Fame because this game is stupid. They think he's not good enough as a hitter, which is wrong. And that doesn't even factor how good he was as a pitcher. Austin Riley in here as well. I also hated playing against him when he was with the Braves. And then Logan Webb retires. He went into this series as our ace, was the opening day starter in 5 of the 6 seasons. He was always a good player, but never a great player. Never made the All-Star team once. We let him go after year 5. That was our first World Series title. But he did not play at all in the postseason that year because he got injured right before the postseason started. So Logan Webb never pitched in a World Series game. Spent a few seasons after us with the Phillies where he was all right. I feel like he's the Tobias Harris of MLB pitchers, and I mean that in a good way. Mookie Betts, Rafael Devers, and Bryce Harper enter the Hall of Fame. Looking at the list of free agents, Brennan Davis just hit a 3-run, essentially walk-off home run to win the World Series. He's been a good player over the last few years. The George Valera contract didn't really work out that much, but we have Blake Sabol here again. He's 37, but Unk still got it, coming off an 840 OPS season last year, so we'll see if we bring him back again I didn't really think we would spend that much money this offseason other than keeping some guys in-house, but boy, was I wrong. Eddie Malejo, 6 years, $77 million to join the bullpen, was not great last year, but he's had a strong track record in the past. But here's the big one, though. Shortstop Modu Nilsson, 9 years, $360. He'll be making a maximum of $40 million per year. I am stoked about this signing, though. He's one of just 3 players in the MLB who are currently a 99 overall. He's a very strong offensive player, hits for good contact, pretty good power, pretty good plate skills, and then he might be the most valuable defensive player outside of a catcher in baseball. He has an elite glove at shortstop. I think he's a more offensively consistent version of like a Francisco Lindor. So that's the type of player we're getting here, coming off a 9-WAR season with the Cardinals. 42.64 in his career. It's a lot of money. We'll see how well this contract ages, but I am very excited about this addition. We would not be done, though. Sherwood Huber, 7 years, $135 at first base. He's been with the White Sox for a while. We played against him in the World Series a handful of years back. We do lose Brennan Davis to the Twins, but we'll survive, adding a great reliever, maybe the most valuable player in baseball, and then Sherwood Huber, whose contact ratings are really, really good. This team is loaded. We just won a World Series, and we got a lot better. We also bring back Blake Sabol again, so he will be sticking around, but other than Sabol and Rogers, there aren't many guys left in the lineup, and then the pitching rotation as well. Camilo Duvall, the mainstay in the bullpen, is gone, but we replace him with Eddie Malejo as the new closer. So here we are into the All-Star break. Kyle Harrison and Scott Rios both make the All-Star team, their 3rd of their careers. Harrison is starting to regress, though, but it's not showing in his play yet. 2.59 ERA. His contract has aged really well so far. Sherwood Huber is an All-Star. He's hitting .340. What a pickup this is going to be. But look who's behind him at first base. First-time All-Star Kyler Rodriguez is only a 77 overall. Finally makes it with the Cubs. Already a career high in homers and RBIs. He's never played 100 games in his career until likely this year. Modu Nilsson is an All-Star, as is Tommy Rogers, who's having a strong season in the outfield. I believe he participated in the Home Run Derby. 98 and 64, another strong season for the Giants. Good enough for the #1 seed in the NL. We have made the World Series 3 years in a row. We've won it 2 years in a row. And to dig a little bit deeper, that's 5 of the last 7 seasons we've made it. 4 of the last 7 we've won. And this might be our most complete roster of the entire series with the additions of Nilsson and Huber in the lineup. Tommy's coming off another great year, so his struggles in the early 2030s might not be so much of an issue. He has hit the 10-year mark of MLB service, but he is still progressing, which is a good sign that his rating isn't going to tank now that he's hit that 10-year service mark, which seems to be when a lot of players start to really go downhill in this game. As for the pitching, Scott Rios was obviously really good. Harrison only an 86, though, as we will play against the Rockies here in the NLDS. They've had a good team over the last few years, finally playing some competitive ball in the NL West as we sweep them. We've got the Mets in the NLCS. I don't think we've played against them in the postseason yet. Up 3-2, we win in 6, back to the World Series against the Oakland A's. They played against the White Sox in the ALCS. That just kind of goes to show how much this series has changed since the start. But this A's team is loaded. Not a lot of recognizable names, but they are stacked. So it's not a surprise to see them doing well early in the series, but we're up 3-2. The road team is 5-0. Make it 6-0. Into Game 7, Warner Green on the mound, and we lose. The road team goes 7-0 in the World Series. Brandon Crook, a guy I wanted to draft a handful of years back, goes 8 2/3, only allowing 1 run. Outside of a Modu Nilsson home run, the offense really struggled. Warner Green was not great. Neither was the bullpen. Thomas Perrigo wins the World Series MVP. Nice mustache, dude. While Elijah Warren wins the postseason MVP with a ridiculously good month of October. Same can be said for Tommy Rogers. Into retirements, another big one. Jung-Hoo Lee is done at the age of 37, much like Camilo Duvall. He's not going to waste much time. He's calling it a career after 10 seasons in the big leagues, and 10 pretty damn good ones. These are far from Hall of Fame numbers, less than 1,400 hits, but let's not get it twisted. I think Jung-Hoo Lee was our best player in this series. In the 6 seasons we had him, his average WAR was 7. He had another really good season in 2030, and then it came crashing down quickly. But he finishes his career with a 308 average, 380 on base, 498 slugging, 880 OPS, roughly, 157 home runs. It's criminal he only made 3 All-Star teams, but it feels like he was the glue for our 2028, 2029 World Series runs. And again, I feel like he was the best player on those teams. And Yo de Los Santos has done a small move in the Season 2 offseason, gave us a very consistent reliever for 6 seasons. He certainly turned out better than I could have expected. Very solid career for Enyel de Los Santos. Munetaka Murakami will be retiring as well. I was really excited when we signed him. I felt like he was going to be one of the top hitters in baseball for over a decade, and that did not materialize. Not to call him a bust or anything. The 4 seasons we had him in this series, he was pretty good, especially seasons 3 and 4. Led the MLB in home runs in 2028, won a Silver Slugger in 28 and 29. But it always felt like there was something left to be desired with Murakami. His clutch rating was always high, but he never made big hits in big moments, whether it was runners on base or in the playoffs. He seemed to struggle when the lights were the brightest. Entering the long-term sim in 2030, he had a really bad season, was okay, sort of, with the Mariners, and then he retires after just 7 big league seasons. So I think it's fair to say he did not live up to his expectations, never made an all-star team. He did win the home run title in 2028. He won 2 Silver Sluggers. So again, he wasn't a bad player by any stretch, but he wasn't necessarily the franchise-altering offensive talent I thought he was when we would sign him. Certainly a complicated legacy for him, a lot less complicated for Jung-Hoo Lee, who doesn't make the Hall of Fame as I expected. The counting stats are nowhere near good enough, but we know how good he was and how impactful he was. Edwin Arroyo headlines the list of free agents. Arroyo never turned into a great player with us, but he's been a solid starter. I would imagine they're going to let him go, though, after spending $360 million on a shortstop last year. Brandon Crook, the starter that cooked us in that Game 7 of the World Series, goes to the Reds. Edwin Arroyo to the Cubs. Ariel Amador to the Athletics. Again, we don't need all these shortstops since we just signed one for $360, but we are losing our entire middle infield. Elijah Warren to the Pirates, and then Blake Sabol is finally gone. He signs with the Philadelphia Phillies. Sabol still has a lot left in the tank. I feel like we probably should have brought him back even at 38 years old, and there really are not many guys left from the original roster. Technically, Kyle Harrison is, but he was also off the team for a few months, so it's really just now Reggie Crawford, who has not ever played in the big leagues. He's been in the minors. Both Camilo Duvall and Jung-Hoo Lee retiring in recent years. It feels like a changing of the guard, if you will. Tommy Rogers, of course, is still here, but nobody else from our World Series lineups at the end of this series is still here. Scott Rios remains in the rotation. Fernando Molina is still here. Mickey Manzanillo was on the World Series roster, but that's it. Everybody else either was in our farm system or was not on the team to begin with. 55-42 at the break. We're behind the Rockies in the division. The Rockies are the number 4 ranked team in the game, but they're 21st in contact and 22nd in power, which is kind of odd. As for the All-Star teams, we would get Tommy Rogers back here. 24 homers, hitting .301. That's now 3 really good seasons in a row. Regression is not going to hit him at least yet, even though he is nearing 11 full seasons of MLB service. On one hand, that's a lot of service time, but on the other hand, he's still only 28 years old. You figure if he has 10 years left, he's going to put up some absurd numbers. So I accidentally simulated through the start of the postseason. Did not mean to do that. We go 96-66. We beat the Pirates in the wild card. We've got the Rockies in the NLCS, and we beat them in 4. Now the Cardinals looking to get back to the World Series for a 5th straight year, and it does not happen. What I've noticed is that our elimination losses, we get blown out. In this game, Colt Keith goes 6 for 6, 2 doubles, 3 homers, and drove in 9 runs. That might be the greatest individual offensive stat line I have ever seen in my life. Screw it. It's not maybe. It is the best offensive stat line I've ever seen. That is ridiculous. Going into another offseason of retirement, Emmanuel Clase is here. He never pitched with us, but I wanted to show his numbers because, my God, are they good. Like, this is close to Mariano Rivera levels of good. 12-time All-Star. I don't know how you keep him out of the Hall of Fame, even though he is just a reliever. Brendan Donovan retires at the age of 40 with the Colorado Rockies. We got Donovan back in Season 4 at the deadline. Had a really good season, but was not good in the playoffs. 2028, played really well, wasn't good in the playoffs. But then 2029, his best year yet. He was awesome in the postseason. He won the playoff MVP. Brendan Donovan was one of my favorite players after we got him. A really fun player to use, super clutch. Spencer Strider will be retiring as well. Certainly fascinating with him because when we traded for him, I assumed he was going to be better than Kyle Harrison through the rest of his career, and boy, was I wrong. His best season would be worse than Kyle Harrison's worst season since the sim. So thank you to San Diego Studios for correcting my mistake and putting these guys back on their original teams. Kyle Harrison's still getting worse, but his rating is still in the 80s. Whereas Strider, well, obviously he retired. Emmanuel Clase does make the Hall of Fame, and we'll take a look at our final season stats because we didn't get to earlier. Tommy, I think, had the best season of his career. He did not win an MVP, unfortunately, but all of his offensive stats are getting better, even against lefties. His lefty stats have gone way down throughout today's episode, but he finished with a 9 WAR. He even won a Gold Glove. He's never been that good of a defender outside of his great speed, but he did not record a single error all year, and he wins a Gold Glove in the outfield. And with a 9 WAR season, I'm really surprised he did not end up winning the MVP. I would imagine, again, he finished in second. As for the rest of the offseason, as we take a look at our list of free agents, we've got a big one here with starting pitcher Rodney Bravo, who developed in our system. He's now been a starter for us over the last 6 years, where he's been quite good. And I think at 30 years old, there's still room for him to get better. So hopefully we bring him back. Whoever does, though, is going to be getting a really good player. Bubba Chandler, also a key reliever. And then Johnny Hackman, we haven't really been talking about him lately. That's because his ratings have fallen off. He's only played 4 games over the last 2 seasons. So now into free agency here in 2036. Looks like, again, we're trying to run it back for the most part. But unfortunately, that wouldn't really happen. Bubba Chandler signs a really team-friendly deal with the Mets. That is a bargain for him. Rodney Bravo, 9 years, $217 with the Nationals. That is a lot of money, but he is a good player. We're going to look to replace him with Luis Mirandez. Not a bad contract for a player of his caliber, but we have so many pitchers in the farm system, I don't really get it. And then Dalton Rushing, even though he's an older player, he's still quite good. We're going to bring him in for 1 year to play catcher. This is what the lineup now looks like. Not even that many guys left from our farm system towards the end of this series are left on the team. Tommy Rogers, again, the only offensive player. Scott Rios, Fernando Molina, Mickey Manzanillo, and I guess Kyle Harrison are only the very few pitchers left. So we'll simulate up to the All-Star break here in 2037. Elijah Warren traded from the Pirates to the White Sox as we sit at 59 and 38. Considering the CPU has taken over pretty much all roster duties, I'm so impressed that they've been able to remain the top-ranked team in the game. We are top 4 in every major team statistical category, which is impressive. Scott Rios will be starting in the All-Star game. He's having another fantastic season. What a player he has turned into. He has lived up to all the hype and then some. Sherwood Huber makes the All-Star team, hitting .302. Another strong year from him. Modu Nilsson, he's had a couple up and down seasons in a row, but he makes the All-Star team this year. No Tommy Rogers, though. Again, his numbers are, they're not bad, but they're not as good as they've been. Nonetheless, he misses out. I would imagine not by too much. I do want to point out, though, his walk rate has improved so much. His walk-to-strikeout ratio is .68. For his career, it's only .5. And his plate discipline rating is now a 90. That's one of his best attributes. This is what we've been focused on since we drafted him. I'm happy to see it coming all to fruition. 93 and 69. Nice. We don't win the division. We don't even get the number 1 wild card. We're going to play the Pirates again in the 4-5 matchup. The Dodgers only won 58 games. It looks like our parity is back. The gap between the best teams and the worst teams is bigger again. Modu Nilsson had a really good season after he wasn't as good last year. I guess we can't really be complaining with 6, 7, 8 WAR seasons. That's about as good as it gets, even if the offensive numbers are a little up and down. Huber played really well. Tommy Rogers had a good season. Maybe not great, but still quite solid. Scott Rios' numbers were ridiculous. I don't know how he has not won a Cy Young yet. Fernando Molina, meanwhile, is really starting to regress, as is Kyle Harrison. Both guys now at 35 years old. Their careers are nearing a close. Harrison was god-awful this year. He has one more year left on his deal. So the end of his contract is going to be quite bad. But overall, the Kyle Harrison deal has felt like a major win, considering Spencer Strider's not even in the league. So we are going to go through our series here against the Pirates, and we got swept. Well, that was quick. Now on to another offseason. No listed retirements here. Ozzie Albies, though, is an interesting one because, remember, I had planned our future to signing him in 2027. Went back to the Braves. He was good early on, but he dipped into the 2030s, and he dipped fast. Hayden Birdsong, I wish we gave him more of an opportunity. He only started one game for us, played quite a bit in 2031, a talented prospect who was just blocked by other guys. Noah Talley, another former draft pick of ours, never got to pitch in the big leagues. Jonathan India, we traded for him in year 1. We had him in seasons 2 and 3 where he was pretty solid. We decided to let him go, and he was okay with the Rockies, never great. He was always a very adequate player, never made the All-Star team, but always solid. Leody Taveras retires as well. He was never a great hitter with us in 2028 and 2029, but really good defensively, good plate skills, and then he was awesome in both of those playoff runs, and obviously we won the World Series both times. Had some solid seasons with the White Sox, pretty good career for Taveras, as we have no Hall of Famers once again here in 2037. Not a long list of free agents. Mickey Manzanillo is an interesting one, though, being that he was one of our former first-round picks. He's never been an elite reliever, minus a couple seasons on and off, but he's always been a good player, and I would suspect some team gives him a nice deal. Wouldn't be too upset if that team is us. But we're not in a good spot in terms of the budget because we've got 4 guys making $30+ million this year, so we're really not going to have a lot of room to spend if we want to. Kyle Harrison's on the last year of his deal. Tommy Rogers is nearing the end of his contract. He's 30 now as well, and he's aged well into the end of his deal. Mickey Manzanillo signs with the Red Sox, and that brings us to 2038, the 9th season of the long-term sim. We're still the number 1 team in the game. We're still very highly in every team stat. And this is what the lineup looks like. Once again, Tommy Rogers, the only guy left in terms of hitting. And then in terms of pitching, Kyle Harrison does not make the final roster. It's really Scott Rios and Fernando Molina at this point. Only 3 guys from our 2029 World Series team remain. 66-33. My God, are we playing some good baseball right now. Clearly the number 1 seed and leading our division. Not a lot of real names, though. Paul Skeens is pretty much the only one. He is still in Pittsburgh with the Pirates. Modu Nilsson makes the All-Star team again, as does Tommy Rogers, 25 homers. But look at this. He is starting to regress. I figured it was going to happen at some point. It's unfortunate. I do want to point out, though, look at the walks. His walk rate is even better this year, currently at 14.4%. So I'm going to choose to enjoy the plate discipline and the walk rate tripling from his rookie year rather than the fact that he's regressing. 107-55, tied for the most amount of wins we've ever gotten in a season. Tommy's now an 89, minus 11 contact versus lefties. His regression did not show up in his play, which is good, but you think it's only a matter of time, just as we saw with John Lee and everybody else. Scott Rios is regressing as well, and it did show up in his numbers. So Rogers and Rios are now starting to go down, which is very unfortunate. Eddie Marmalejo, though, is a beast. We haven't really talked about him a whole lot, but he has been an awesome pickup for us. We're struggling against the Diamondbacks, and we lose in 4. 107 wins, all for that. That's baseball for you. You can win nearly 110 games and lose in the first round of the playoffs. We have not made the World Series in a minute. We've got to get back there. That starts with retirements. Nobody leaves our organization. Joey Gallo, I want to look at him real quick because his plate vision is 0. I wonder how many strikeouts he would have in the big leagues. Probably a lot. We had him in Season 2. His strikeout rate that year was 34.5%. His last year, it was 56%. Ian Hamilton, we signed him going into Season 6 as a 1-year deal. He ended up being way more than that, though, going into the sim. He had some really good seasons. His final year with us, his ERA was 0. Never got to pitch again, though. Tristan McKenzie is done. This was not one of our better roster moves. We signed him. He sucked. We traded him back to Cleveland, and then he ended up being really good. So yeah, this was a whiff. That's for sure. We either shouldn't have signed him to begin with, or we should have stuck it out. Just like Liover Peguero, Heliot Ramos had me fooled in year number 3. Those first 2 months, he was one of the better hitters in the league. Had some solid seasons after, but never became more than a high-level platoon player. We've had, no Hall of Famers, it feels like, throughout this series. As hard as it is to get in the Baseball Hall of Fame, it feels like it's too hard in this game for players to develop and turn into Hall of Fame-level guys. Warner Green is looking for a contract extension. He's had a couple really good seasons in a row, so he will be getting a fat bag. The 5-year deal for Ryan Clifford ended up being a great deal for us, especially that first year, but overall, big win. Kyle Harrison, meanwhile, he is in the 60s. He is cooked, as his 9-year deal that we started the episode with is now over. We're going to add to the bullpen Angel Silva, 5 years, 40. Warner Green to the Mets. I thought he would get more. I would have been happy to pay that. But we land a big get here with third baseman Adrian Guerra. Only 26 years old. He's been with the Athletics. He was on the team that beat us in the World Series a few years back. Big-time power bat, and at just 26 years old, you think there's plenty of room for him to progress. I'm surprised he signed for so cheap. With his age and offensive production, I would have thought he would have gotten double the amount of annual value that we gave him. 7 years, less than $110 million total. Feels like a steal. This is what the team looks like. Scott Rios and Tommy Rogers beginning to regress. Fernando Molina is now a minor leaguer at this point. So Rios and Tommy are really the only guys left. Here looking at the All-Star teams, Warner Green makes it, of course. As does Keo Burton, a guy I wanted to draft a few years back. And then Rodney Bravo. All these former Giants or could have been Giants, but no actual Giants. Adrian Guerra makes it at first base. This guy's going to be a demon, I'm telling you. He has 32 homers already at the All-Star break. Why was he available for so cheap? I don't get it. Liam Patterson, the former Giant, also made the All-Star team at first base. As for the rest of the NL, Modul Nielsen is hitting .343. He is balling. If he keeps it up, he could be looking at a 10 WAR at the end of the season. As for the older guys, though, Scott Rios is still going down, having a good but not great year. And then Tommy Rogers, he is going down really fast, and I think it's starting to show in his play. 774 OPS. He's not the same guy, it looks like, unfortunately, at just 31 years of age. 92 and 70. We will be playing the Nationals in the first round as a wild card, losing out on the division by 1 game. Great season for Nielsen. He hits nearly .330. Adrian Guerra, 48 home runs. He wins the MVP in his first year as a Giant. Oakland's got to be kicking themselves. Sherwood Hubert, another great year. Tommy Rogers actually played really well to finish the year. His OPS was in the mid-700s. It finishes at 903. Maybe there's still something left in the tank for Tommy, who had a terrific second half of the campaign. As for the pitching, Scott Rios is a 91. By rating, he is no longer the ace, but he's still pitching like it. He also had a very good second half of the year. So we're playing against Washington. Now we have gone through 10 seasons of the long-term sim as we get swept, by the way. We have not missed the postseason once. Again, I give the CPU credit. They've done a really good job of keeping this team good. Patrick Bailey retires at the age of 40. Bailey never got to be a full-time starter with us because of Blake Sabol. I kind of assumed when we started the series he would be the long-term catcher, and he wasn't. But he was really good as a platoon bat, and then when we needed him to make plays against lefties, he did. 2029 World Series against the lefty-heavy Royals rotation, what does he do? He went to the World Series MVP, although that did not save in this save file, but we do know it actually happened. Genesis Cabrera retires as well. He was a guy I targeted early in the series. We got him in year 3, struggled early, but was really solid for 3.5 years. Had a great season in 2030 with Milwaukee and Boston. Kyle Harrison is not going to stick around in free agency for long. He retires at the age of 38. Certainly an interesting legacy here. He was really good for us, though, throughout the series. It was just a matter of him staying healthy and good at the same time. Season 3 was the only time he really did that, which is why I traded him. I felt like Spencer Strider was going to age better, and Well, that aged terribly. Kyle Harrison was great through the 2030s. Only made 2 All-Star teams, but he did win a Cy Young and basically had 2 really good careers with us. Fernando Molina also retires as well at the age of 38. We're now getting to the point where our draft picks are done. I picked him as a reliever. I always thought of him as a starter, though. We turned him into a starter, where early in his career he was really good. Then he struggled, and then he became kind of good in the 2030s, made an All-Star team in 2033. Never played anywhere other than the Giants, unlike Kyle Harrison, who spent 2 months in Atlanta. Oswald Peraza was not here for long, but his impact was noted. We got him at the 2029 trade deadline, by far his best season. He never replicated that with the Angels or anywhere else. Did make an All-Star team. He did not win the World Series MVP, but I guess he does in this version of the save file. Carson Whisenhunt is done. He was so inconsistent early for us, which is why we traded him, but he became a solid player for us. No Hall of Famers, though. I figured Kyle Harrison would not, but Kyle Harrison had 2 really good careers with us, one before the sim and then one after the trade during the sim. In terms of free agents, Simone Vincent has been here for a decade. We had him developing in the farm system during the series, and he has been a mainstay in our lineup through the 2030s. I wouldn't mind seeing us bring him back. I think we have more long-term flexibility because Nilsson only has 4 years left, Rogers only has 1, Rios only has 2, Huber only has 2, Marmolejo's on the last year. So we're going to be able to really spend soon as we add Jesus Rodriguez, another starting pitcher, and that brings us into 2040. Bodu Nilsson still a 99 overall. Sherwood Huber still balling. Adrian Guerra coming off his MVP season. Tommy's only an 84, though. As for the pitching, Bruce Gross is now the ace. He was a mid-round pick of ours, I believe, in 2028. Scott Rios now the number 2. So we will make it up to the All-Star break, 60-37. Another very good season so far for the San Francisco Giants, 3 games ahead of the Rockies in the division. I feel like Colorado pretty consistently has been our number 1 threat in the division through the 2030s. On the All-Star team, Bruce Gross makes it. Eddie Marmolejo gets in. I think that's his first appearance, believe it or not. He should have more by now. Adrian Guerra and Sherwood Huber both make it. And that is it in terms of position players. As for the old guys, Scott Rios is all the way down to an 87, and Tommy's down to an 81. His power is shot, but he's hitting .328, which is by far a career high for him. So we go 102-60. We're able to beat out the Rockies to win the division, grabbing the number 1 seed again. As we take a look at the numbers for this season, Sherwood Huber, .326. His contract is pretty much over. What a steal he ended up being for $100 million. This dude rakes. Tommy Rogers, .331. The power is cooked, but he is still a highly impactful player. He's had an OPS of at least 900 in each of the last 7 seasons. So he is still a very, very good hitter, even if his power really isn't there anymore. Scott Rios is an 85. He is now the 4th starter in the rotation in terms of overall rating. That's how far he has begun to fall. Him and Rogers are only going to go down even more, but both of them are still very capable players finding different ways to be productive. We'll get the Rockies here in the NLDS, 2 of the best teams in the NL this year. This should prove to be a fun battle. We're up 2-1, coming off a 1-0 win. Lose Game 4, Bruce Gross on the mound in Game 5, and we lose. The White Sox defeat the Philadelphia Phillies in the World Series, and that will bring us into another offseason. And as we get farther and farther along, we're going to see more and more retirements from relevant players. Here's one, Brennan Davis. He wasn't all that relevant. I mean, he only played like maybe 20 games in the actual series. But in the 2030s, he was surprisingly good. We let him go, 30 home runs in Minnesota. Then he spends a year with the Rays and then goes right back to Minnesota, where he has another solid year. Edward Cabrera was not in this series, so I'll be quick here. But I'm salty that he did not regress until his late 30s. Why couldn't we get this last year when he had won, 4 or 5 Cy Youngs in a row? He could have been like the best pitcher ever if he didn't regress at 29. Jojo Romero is done. Certainly a weird career, but a good one. We had him for 2 years where he was unbelievably good. His 2028 playoff run was as dominant as it gets for a reliever. Signs with the Twins and played horrible. We get him at the deadline. Was bad. Had a great playoff run. Was bad again. But then played well into the 2030s. I do want to shout out Eggy Rosario real quick. He might be the most hilarious defensive player I've ever seen, although Michael Garcia, who also retired, gets a close second. If not for those two, we absolutely would not have won the 2029 World Series. No way. Those two guys did us a lot of favors. We finally have a Hall of Famer! Riley Green, my glorious king. Where do I even begin? He gets in as a Pirate, though. Don't know how I feel about that. Eddie Marmolejo's 6-year deal is up. That contract ended up being a major win. He is now a free agent. Tommy Rogers' 12-year deal is over. He started to regress at the worst time for his pockets right when the deal ended, but obviously we're going to look to bring him back. So Eddie Marmolejo returns a big 6-year extension. On one hand, I'm happy he's back because he's a stud, but all that money for a 34-year-old reliever, I feel like that is going to age pretty horribly. Tommy's still in the lineup. He's a 78 overall here in the year 2041. Scott Rios is now the number 5 starter in the rotation. And again, those are really the only guys left on our team, but it doesn't matter. We're still that good. 64-33 going into the break. In terms of all-stars, we would get Jamie Griggs in there. Stefan Fernandez, who we haven't talked about at all. He's been developing in the system. Modul Nilsson makes it there, so 3 of our 4 infielders are all all-stars. Scott Rios, though, is an 81, and Tommy Rogers is a 75. But Rogers is still really good. 934 OPS. His ratings are falling down fast, but he is still raking. 106-56, one of our best seasons yet. We win the division by 20 games. Troy Leroy at shortstop, that's a name to watch out for. He is developing really well. Tommy is a 74, but still hit 284, and his power's back. He hit 21 home runs. That's very respectable. As for the pitching, Scott Rios has now moved into the bullpen. He is only an 80 overall. 34 years old, it's understandable, but it does suck that his rating, much like Tommy's, has fallen into their early 30s rather than either of those guys likely sticking it out into their mid to late 30s. So we'll see who we've got in the playoffs here. It's Atlanta, just like old times. Welcome to the unction. Sure enough, we would sweep them 14-0 in this last game. Homers for Griggs, Fernandez, Cobb, and 2 for George Groniga, who was a draft pick of ours, I think, all the way back in year 2. Against the Cardinals, we win in 6, and we're finally back in the World Series for the first time probably in about 6 or 7 years. It's been a while. We've got the Red Sox, who do not have many recognizable names. Derek Mangels was a good prospect early in this series, so was Ray Romero. They do have former Giant Mickey Manzanillo. That's a recognizable name. Dalton Rushing, who was here for a year, also on the team. We're looking good early, though, up 3-1, but we would lose the next 2. Game 7, and we win! JT Lucas, the starting pitcher with the win. Adrian Guerra hits 2 triples. He has like 20 speed. How is he hitting all them triples? I've noticed that with him. He's a really good triples hitter, even though he's slow as hell. So Alvaro Vasquez, I do not know who that is, wins the World Series MVP. Jamie Griggs wins the playoff MVP. Looking at retirements, here is Chase Dolander. What a steal in the Rule 5 draft he ended up being after he was a bust with the Rockies. We let him go after 3 years, and I'll give him credit. His contract aged better than I expected with the Padres. Not that he was some great player, but he was very respectable. Stone Garrett retires. Easily one of my favorite players of the series. We got him in year number 3, and man, was he fun. We called him Stone Cold Clutch for a reason, one of our best clutch hitters, and he played well late in his career. Even as a 39-year-old in 2035, OPS still above 800. Very respectable player the entire way. Only a one-time All-Star, but easily one of the 4 or 5 most valuable players of this series. But for every Stone Garrett, you get a lot of Marco Lucianos. He was our number 1 prospect going into this series, and he was a colossal bust. Season 2, he played pretty well, though. 2.3 WAR. I felt like he was really going to take some steps. The rest of his career, he combined for a negative WAR. In 2026, his offensive numbers were still pretty solid, but we traded him away. I saw the writing on the wall. He was a horrific defensive player. I felt like he wasn't really improving that much offensively, and I was right. He was a colossal bust. It was him and Kyle Harrison at the top of our farm system to start the series. Harrison lived up to the hype. Luciano did not. Kyler Rodriguez is done at the age of 35. Certainly a fascinating player, given that, he was quite good very early into his career, but he was very injury prone, and he never played more than 100 games with us. But his best moments were not in the regular season, they were in the playoffs. 2028 World Series MVP. 2029, he hits the walk-off home run to win the World Series. Had a really good season in 2035 with the Cubs, where he made the All-Star team. He only had one more season after that, where he hit 339 with the A's. And then he's just been rotting away in free agency. Kyler never became the consistent offensive force I had hoped for, only playing over 100 games once, but he also gave us some of the best moments of this series, including the walk-off winner against the Royals in the World Series. That's the final swing of this series, and probably the best one. Sherwood Huber's 7-year contract is up. Again, what a steal. Hit above 300 all 7 seasons, 900 OPS at least 6 times. Scott Rios' big contract is up. We're not letting him retire anywhere else. Modu Nilsson's deal is almost up, and he has aged surprisingly well. At 34 years old, he's still a 96 overall. He's still one of the best shortstops in Major League Baseball. We are going to add Bruce Payne. He is an 88 overall starting pitcher. Todd Rodriguez as well, another veteran arm. Quinn Monk goes to the Phillies. He's been with our team for a while. He was a draft pick of ours, I think, in Season 4. George Groniga, as I mentioned, a pick of ours in Season 2. He goes to the Diamondbacks. Other than Modu Nilsson making over $50 million, we're not paying that many guys that much more money. Unfortunately, though, Scott Rios will not start the year in the big leagues. Tommy Rogers will, but with him being a 74, I kind of think this is going to be his last season as a big league starter, at the very least. Bruce Gross is the starter in the NL at pitcher, and we just gave him a big extension last offseason, and I think that deal is going to end up aging quite well. Emil Franco, still an all-star with the Marlins. He's only 33 years old, and he has turned into a phenomenal offensive player. He was drafted, I believe, in Season 3. Stefan Hernandez and Modu Nilsson both making in the infield for us. As for Tommy Rogers, it's over. He's a 68 overall, and he is hitting .201. I am afraid he is cooked, chat. I'm honestly impressed it took him this long, but he is horrific. So we are now 102-60 here at the end of the season, looking for potentially one more World Series with Tommy Rogers on the team. Guerra had another great year. Everybody's producing still. Tommy's average went up to 230. He played pretty well in the second half of the year. Scott Rios is back on the big league roster, although he spent the entire regular season in the minors, and he is only a 74 overall. So here in the playoffs, we will face off against the Arizona Diamondbacks in the first round, and we will go to a Game 5 and we win. Now against the Padres, looking good early, but now we're down. We win, then we lose Game 6. JT Lucas on the mound, and we win Game 7. Lucas won Game 7 of the World Series last year. He won his Game 5 against Arizona. He wins his Game 7 against the Padres. And guess what? He's going to be on the mound in Game 7 of the World Series against the Mariners, another one of our MLB The Show 25 finalists. And he loses. So unfortunately, JT Lucas, who's a big game performer, does not perform in this big game. Bruce Gross, though, did win the Cy Young. Figured I would mention that. Looking at retirements, Edgar Carroll, I think he's the last real player left on our team. Adael Amador retires. Owen Casey, who we traded for Stone Garrett, ended up being a very good deal. But he was a great player with the Nationals. I'm disappointed they didn't give him more of a chance. When he was on the field, he was a beast. Bryce Eldridge, the number 1 first-round pick going into the series, never played a game with us. We traded him, I believe, for Jose Ramirez, and since he helped us win a World Series, that ended up being a good deal. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Juan Soto, and Ronald Acuna all make the Hall of Fame, all very well deserved. So now here in 2042, it feels like times are kind of changing for us. Sherwood Huber's still around, but he's only an 82. JT Lucas leaves for the Baltimore Orioles. We do add Francisco Bautista to replace him in the rotation. Now in 2043, Scott Rios and Tommy Rogers are both not on the big league roster. 36 and 35 years old, respectively. 74 and 67 overall. Now that these guys are not on the Major League roster, we're going to go through seasons a lot quicker. This team is going to change a lot with all the flexibility we have financially. Modu Nilsson's on the last year of his 9-year deal, and this contract has been a major win for us. He has aged very well into that deal, and he's still an all-star level player. Adrian Guerra is also still really good. His deal is also almost up. Other than Nilsson, though, nobody else is making more than like 15 a year. So we would win 99 games. We would lose in the first. We'd get swept in the first round by Arizona. Bruce Gross wins another MVP as we look at the list of retirements. No one super notable from our team or really across the league at all. Now Modou Nielsen is starting to regress a lot. He had a down season this year, but he was so good the other 8 seasons, it's hard to be upset at all. Sherwood Huber's production has gone down, but again, he raked for us through the long-term sim. I've decided to sign Blake Sabol. He's one of the few guys still left in baseball. He's a 50 overall. I figured we would add him to the organization. We would win 87 games. We would not go too far in the playoffs. And Blake Sabol will retire. I'm happy he retired as a Giant. All of his stats went up this year. At 47 years old, he's finding a way to get better. What an interesting career for Blake Sabol. Coming into this series, I didn't really think much of him. 26-year-old, 68 overall catcher with like maybe 85 potential, if that. Boy, was this guy good. He had his limits against lefties, but that's what Patrick Bailey was for. Sabol was a great power hitter, hit for good contact, really improved defensively, and he was clutch. 99 clutch rating throughout the series. Only made one All-Star team. He absolutely should have had more. Warren Green, he had a really strong prime, but he did not age very gracefully. He retires at 39. Only one All-Star nod, but he did win the Cy Young that year, so I guess things could have gone worse for him. No Hall of Famers, no Blake Sabol, although when it's all said and done, Sabol's going to be like a top... He might be the third best player from this series after Lee and Rogers, if we think about it. Royals beat the Cubs in the World Series. Rios is a 58. Rogers is a 58. It's only a matter of time at this point until they retire. It will not be this year. Federico Casillas, we drafted him all the way in Season 1. I was really surprised to see him here. He really only had one opportunity with the Nationals where he really wasn't that bad, to his credit. Edwin Arroyo, he was our starter at shortstop through the early portion of the long-term sim before we got Modou Nielsen. I wish he progressed a little bit faster, a little bit quicker, but he was a productive player through the 2030s. Never was great, never was an all-star level guy, but he was solid. 80 and 82, we miss out on the playoffs here in 2046. The first time since 2025 we have made the playoffs for 20 years in a row until now. That is really impressive that it was that long. And again, credit to the CPU for keeping our team good. In terms of retirements, no Rios, no Rogers. Vicente Alegre, our very first international free agent, is here. Never played a game with us. It didn't work out. He progressed slow, dealt with injuries, but he was actually really productive in the long-term sim. He made 2 All-Stars. I did not expect that at all coming into the day, but I'm happy for him to see that it ended up working out. When we originally got him, I thought he was going to be our long-term catcher. Colt Keith, Gritty Tigers legend, Emmanuel Del Valle, and Corbin Carroll all make the Hall of Fame. Del Valle is the first fictional player in the Hall of Fame, and he was a subscriber-made international free agent. He goes in as a White Sox, but during the series, spent his time with the Red Sox. 71 and 91 this season. Our team has fallen on hard times. No major retirement. Stephen Kuo makes the Hall of Fame, the first drafted player in the series to make it. He was in the same draft class as Tommy Rogers. I really liked him, but obviously Tommy was Tommy. Kuo arguably had the better career, though, but remember, he was not drafted by the Angels. He was picked by San Diego. They traded him as a rookie for Tommy Edman. I thought it was a horrible deal at the time, and I was right. Stephen Kuo ended up making the Hall of Fame. That deal single-handedly set the Padres back like a decade, which works out for us since we were in their division. So remember earlier today when I mentioned that this team is a weird thing for signing former players? Well, they did it again. After spending a couple years with the Rays, Modou Nielsen has a 62 overall, how the mighty have fallen. He has returned. I like seeing all these guys back. It creates for fun storylines, but it's ironic that the CPU's doing all of this. They saw what I did with JoJo Romero in Season 6 and decided to replicate it. 79 and 83, a third straight year out of the playoffs as the Phillies end up winning the World Series. Still no major retirements on our side. Jeremy Franco is done, though, and if you remember, he was a generational prospect the same year we picked Tommy Rogers. Both of them were on the board. We picked Rogers. Now, Franco is going to retire with better counting stats, more hits, more home runs, but he's going to finish with a lower WAR because he played first base, and he's going to have a lower OPS than Tommy Rogers. He had more at-bats than Tommy did, but he goes into the Hall of Fame as an Astro, even though we really know him as a White Sox. 85 and 77, we do make the playoffs finally, but we lose in the first round to the Dodgers. In 2049, Emil Franco is done. He ended up being far and away the best drafted player of the series. He's the only guy during the span of this series to get to the 3,000 hit mark, and he shattered it. 3,200 hits, 560 home runs. He was with the Angels for most of this series, had some great seasons with the Marlins. 11-time All-Star, only 1 MVP, but 6 Silver Sluggers. He was a beast. And speaking of beasts, Sherwood Huber, I liked him as a draft prospect. We signed him during the long-term sim, and he was a stud. During his 7-year deal, made the All-Star team 5 times, hit above 300 all 7 seasons, OPS at least 880 in all 7, as Emil Franco makes the Hall of Fame. Into 2050, we win 87 games, not going to go on a big playoff run. And again, not a super long list of retirements, although Mickey Manzanillo is here, former first-round pick of ours, who ended up being a very quality player with us and Boston. Never made an All-Star team, though, unfortunately. Now in 2051, 81 and 81, we started the Sim 500. It would be fitting if we end the Sim 500. But that will not be the case. We've got at least one more year. Quinn Monk is there. Eddie Mara Malejo. He was a stud for us in the long-term sim. Call me crazy, but this could be a Hall of Fame career as a reliever. Other than Emmanuel Clase, he was the next best reliever in this save file. Drafted as a really raw prospect all the way back in year 1, and he was really good, mostly with us. If he did go into the Hall, it would have been as a Giant. 79 and 83, no playoffs for us here in the year 2052. The Rays win the World Series, the last of our 4 finalists for MLB The Show 25. Ethan Salas retires. He is the final real player left in the save file. He entered the series as a 17-year-old, and now he is 46. How time has flied. Into 2053, the 30th season now of the series. We go 89 and 73, our best season in a while. Don't win a playoff series, though. Into the list of retirements now. At this point, I'm really recognizing none of these names, as Wilhelm von Keisenberg, an international free agent prospect, goes to the Hall of Fame. 88 and 74 here in the year 2054. The 25th season of the long-term sim as the Rays win the World Series again. Going into retirements, we do get a big one. I'm not sure how he left our team, but in free agency, Tommy Rogers is hanging up the cleats at the ripe young age of 47. What a career for Tommy Rogers. Unfortunately, his rookie season stats are not saved here. But he made an early impact. He was in the minors for about 2 months, and we called him up. In his first 2 seasons, he was very rough around the edges. Inconsistent contact, did not draw walks. Then year 3 comes around, 2028, makes the All-Star team as a big playoff run, and that was just the start. Now, he had a bad stretch from 2031 to 2033, but then from there, he had his best seasons. From 2034 through 2041, he never had an OPS less than 900, and he aged very well into his 12-year contract, and then he fell off really quick. 2042, his OPS was in the 600s, and he has not played in a big league game since then. That was like 12 years ago at this point. 60.2 career WAR, 2,286 career hits, 429 career home runs, 7 All-Stars, a Gold Glove, 4 Silver Sluggers, a Hank Aaron, never won an MVP. But he is, I guess, really only a 4-time champion. I don't think he would have been on the last team. But shout out Tommy Rogers, the face of this series. Now, unfortunately, he did not make the Hall of Fame. I felt like his numbers would be right on the fringe, and he misses out. So that means it's likely that this team is going to have no Hall of Famers, believe it or not. And with that, we are down to 1. Scott Rios, at 48 years old, is the last man standing. When he is done, we are done. And he hasn't pitched in a meaningful game in like 15 years. I would hope he's done soon. 98 and 64, though, but we don't get out of the first round of the playoffs. And sure enough, Scott Rios retires. We have made it to the end of the road. Here in, I think, 2055? I've lost count. But what a career for Scott Rios, who represents everything right about this series, but also everything I will look to change in MLB The Show 25. Because we drafted him in Season 1. We've been familiar with him since, like, Episode 5. Despite that, he didn't really get to play a lot during the actual series. He started half the year in 2028, half the year in 2029, but we only got around a full season of sample from him in terms of big league play. We didn't get to see his best years in the 2030s. And what I meant earlier by saying what I'm going to change for MLB The Show 25, I'm going to go into more detail about my plans once the series starts. But I'm planning on going a lot longer in terms of seasons in the actual series, moving through regular seasons and possibly postseason runs quicker so we can get through more seasons. 4 All-Star appearances for Scott Rios. I don't think it's going to be enough to make the Hall of Fame. He did have some really good seasons. Finished in second for the Cy Young, I believe, twice. 2 Hall of Famers, Guillermo Castellano. He was a top pick in the final draft of the actual series by the Yankees. And then Charles Stein, who was drafted earlier today in the sim by the Nationals. So now our old guys are all gone. The youngest players on the team were born during the sim. They were born today. It's kind of crazy looking at the roster history because Tommy Rogers and Scott Rios last played in 2041. We have basically nobody in the organization who was here before then. So those guys have been stuck in the minors longer than pretty much everybody has been on our team to begin with, which shows how much the roster has changed. I wondered how many of these check marks we were going to fill up. The answer was a lot. In terms of individual stat leaders, we had someone lead in every stat except for strikeouts and whip, but we got everything else. We finished the series going to 7 World Series. We went 5-2. 5 World Series titles. Hard to be too upset with that. We were consistently a good playoff team all the way until around 2045. We made the playoffs 20 seasons in a row. And in picking the Giants this year, I knew it was a different type of team than I've picked in the past. Look at previous years with the Marlins, the Guardians, the Orioles, the Pirates. Those are all smaller market teams who don't spend a lot of money, but that was not the case with the Giants, and because of that, I shifted my entire roster building philosophy. Rather than focusing on building purely through the draft and through the minor league system, I built this team around young stars, obviously like Tommy Rogers, but I really wanted the core of this team to be good veterans. And many of the top players in this series we added through trades or free agency. So it was certainly a different kind of roster building experience, but definitely a very fun one. And obviously we had some great players along the way. Tommy Rogers was the face of this series. Jung-Hoo Lee I felt like was the best player. And we got to see some fun success stories for guys like Stone Garrett, Blake Sabol, players you wouldn't have necessarily expected. We got to see Sandy Alcantara resurrect his legacy on the channel after it was dented in the Marlins series. And it was fun watching these guys go through the entirety of their major league careers, which is where we are going to wrap up today, the conclusion of the San Francisco Giants franchise here on MLB The Show 24. This has been a very enjoyable series. I hope you guys have had as much fun with it as I have through nearly 100 episodes now. But don't look back. MLB The Show 25 is right around the corner. The game comes out next week. I'm around 95% sure of the team I'm going to be picking. You should still vote in the YouTube community tab. Maybe you can sway my opinion. The team reveal will be up likely on Wednesday. The series will be starting next weekend. And I have some crazy ideas in the memory bank that I'm excited to share with you guys, unlike anything you've ever seen before in a YouTube franchise, let alone from MLB The Show. This series in MLB 25 will be my best work yet. So that'll wrap up the episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. For the final time in the San Francisco Giants franchise here on MLB The Show 24. Peace out.